So we are going to start a new topic, Java Lambdas. Lambda is a very powerful feature that was introduced in Java 8. A lambda function in Java is kind of an anonymous function. So what happens in Java when we write a method, we follow a certain syntax, we give the access modifier, the return type, the name of the method, the arguments if there are any, then the method body. But when we write a lambda, it is like a function but without a name. We will see a lot more details when we cover how to write lambdas, but for now, take it as an anonymous function. And the lambdas are statically typed, which means Java always focus on the types. So whatever we are writing in lambda, it must provide the information of the type of the arguments, the type of the return. So for example, if we define the arguments to be integer, the type will be fixed. And the most important point on the lambda is that it is a compact way of passing behavior. So what do we mean by that? So in Java, because Java is an object-oriented programming language, so it focuses on the objects, and the behavior basically belongs to the object. So we know that an object will have a state in the form of instance variables, then it will have the behavior in the form of methods. So whatever methods we write in a class, it represents the behavior of that type, and that behavior is tied with an object. So we cannot pass the behavior, just the behavior, to some other object. For example, we have to pass the object so that the state and the behavior will be passed as a unit. It's not possible, at least there is no easy or clean way in Java to pass the behavior independently, but that is what lambda is going to do actually. So for example, if we focus more on passing the behavior, so for example, we have a method public int sum, and it accepts two arguments, integer arguments int x and y, then it returns the sum of those two values. Now in traditional Java, if we want to use this sum method from any other method, so for example here we are trying to use the sum method in my method. Now in Java, as soon as we write sum, or wherever we are trying to use the sum method, we have to write a syntax something like this. So for example, here we are calling sum, then we are passing two values 4, 10. The problem with this syntax is it is executed immediately. So as soon as JVM starts invoking my method, it checks that it is making another call to sum method, and these are the parameters. So it will execute the sum first, it will get the result, and then pass that result to my method. So the sum method will be executed right away. There is no way to defer the execution of sum method. So for example, if we want to do this, so what we need to understand, if there is a way to pass the method definition only, if there is a way where we can pass what sum is doing instead of executing the sum method in my method, then my method will have some logic to execute. Then at a later point of time, we want this pass definition to execute. So that is what we mean by passing the behavior. So instead of executing the sum, we want to pass the behavior of sum so that another function can use it at a later point of time. Now that we understand at least the very basics of lambda and what are we trying to solve, let's focus on what does it look like, a lambda function. So here we will discuss couple of ways we can write lambda functions, and then we will focus more from the programming perspective in the upcoming videos. So the basics of a lambda function is basically there are two important parts. On the left hand side we see lambda parameters, then there is an arrow sign, and on the right hand side is the lambda body. Now there are various ways we can write a lambda function. There are a lot of rules related to the lambda functions which finally defines a illegal and illegal lambda function. So we'll start from the example number 1. So here we see that we have empty parentheses, then the arrow method, and then the body is basically a print message, system.out.println some value. So this is a valid lambda function. It has empty parentheses. Now if we have empty if there are no parameters, then we need to provide empty parentheses, then the arrow, and then the body. Because there is only one liner in the body, so we simply write the code directly. Now example number 2, we say that a, then arrow function, arrow sign, and SOP is basically a short form for system.out.println. So we are simply printing the value. Now here we see that a is the argument, same as the method parameter. A is the argument. So whenever this lambda will be executed, it expects a value. Now what is the type of the value? It will be inferred by the context. We will talk more about it in a later video. And there are no parentheses. So when there is only a single parameter, we can omit the data type and the parentheses. Body remains the same. Now the example number 3 is basically a detailed version of example number 2. Here we see the parentheses and we have explicitly defined the type integer. So we say that this lambda function will expect a parameter of type integer and we are naming it a. Then body is simply printing the passed value a. Now in the example number 4, we see there are two parameters now, a comma b. Then the body is simply printing the sum of a and b. Now here we see we have the parentheses. So whenever we have multiple arguments, we have to provide the parentheses. This is a condition. What we can omit is the data type, because they will be inferred by the context where we are passing this lambda. There will be a video on the lambda evaluation where we will understand this inferred logic. Now similarly, the example number 5 is the detailed version of example number 4. So we have provided the data type of both the parameters a and b, and this time the body is simply printing the multiplication of a and b. Now if we come to the example number 6, so we see on the left hand side there are parentheses because we have multiple parameters. Then there are two parameters s1 and s2 of type string. Body now the body has changed. Now we see the curly braces on the right hand side. So if there is a single statement that we want to execute, then we can omit the curly braces. But if there are multiple statements, more than one, then we have to provide the curly braces because this is now a block statement. And after that, whatever we are writing in that block scope, it must end with semicolon. So here we see there is a single line in the block structure, but in the curly braces, because we are writing the same print statement, we see the semicolon at the end. So that must follow the usual Java rules related to writing the Java code. And similarly, example number 7, we see two method arguments of type integer, and body starts with curly braces, and this body in this example the body has two statements, so we have to put the curly braces. All right, so just to recap, we covered what are lambdas and what kind of problems lambdas are trying to solve, and then we saw a bunch of examples of legal lambdas. Now in the next video we will see how can we understand lambdas more, and then we will focus on the coding aspects of it. That's it for now. Thank you. So in the last video we saw a bunch of examples on the lambdas. What does a lambda look like? There is still very much to process on the lambdas. How do we write them? How do we execute them? How do we fit them in our usual coding, things like that. And it is actually a bit difficult to understand, to grasp the concept of lambda, because we are used to write methods, especially Java programmers. So in this video, we will try to draw a parallel between a method and a lambda function so that we can at least have some idea what exactly is a lambda function, and we so that we have some hints how do we write a lambda on our own. So let's start here. So here we have a method public int sum, and there are two method parameters of type integer, int x and int y. Then the method has the body, which basically sums the integer values x plus y, stores the result in a temporary variable, and then returns the result. So we have the method body, we have the curly braces. Now if we have to write the corresponding lambda, what can we do? How can we move from a method to a lambda? So lambdas are smart. They infer some things from the context. We still have to cover the how does this work, but for now we will keep this short. So for example, from the method we can drop the access modifier. Similarly, we can drop the return type because from the context lambda knows what it needs to return. The name of the method, because we said lambdas are anonymous function, a function without a name, so we obviously don't need the name. Then because this method has multiple parameters, more than one, so what we can do, we can keep the parenthesis because it is a required condition if the lambda function has multiple parameters. So we can keep the parenthesis as of now. We can even keep the data type of the parameters, so int x comma int y. Now what we need to do is we need to add an arrow sign between the method signature, basically the parenthesis, and the start of the curly brace. So if we add the arrow sign and keep everything else same, then we have the corresponding lambda. So if we see, this is the corresponding lambda to pass two input parameters and return an integer result. It has curly braces, it has the body. So we converted, we wrote our first lambda function from the method. All right. Things to highlight, we can drop we don't need the access modifier, return type, the name. All we need to have is basically the parameters, input parameters, arrow sign, and the body of the lambda. That's it. So hope it makes some sense. How do we write lambdas? In the future lessons, we will do a lot of exercises on the lambda, so it will be very much clear. All right. Thank you for now.